CNN's panel completely erupted after Trump's new taxpayer-backed anti-weaponization fund sparked outrage over possible payouts to January 6 defendants and Trump allies, with Navarro calling it outright corruption. Subscribe to the channel, comment where you're watching from, and tell me if you think Republicans are exposing a massive hypocrisy on reparations and government handouts. CNN's panel exploded after details emerged after Donald Trump's new so-called anti-weaponization fund, a massive taxpayer-backed pool of money that could potentially compensate January 6 defendants and Trump allies who claim they were unfairly targeted by the government. During the exchange, Navarro absolutely shredded the proposal as a corrupt slush fund designed to reward Trump loyalists, while ordinary Americans struggle with rising costs, healthcare issues, and economic instability. Meanwhile, Scott Jennings once again found himself trying to defend the indefensible, awkwardly arguing that people unfairly targeted by the DOJ should have some form of recourse, even while admitting the entire process makes him uncomfortable because Trump's own allies would effectively oversee the payouts. The discussion became even more intense when the panel pointed out the staggering hypocrisy behind Republicans suddenly embracing a form of reparations for January 6 defendants after spending decades attacking the idea of reparations for slavery, systemic racism, or wrongful incarceration. And things only got worse after legal experts began warning that buried inside the agreement could be provisions shielding Trump, his businesses, family members, and associates from future investigations or financial liability, raising massive concerns about corruption, abuse of power, and whether the administration is attempting to place itself above the law entirely. Stay tuned because I've got a lot to say about the contradictions and legal concerns buried inside this entire debate.
Tonight, President Trump wants to reward his friends and some of his most notorious supporters with cash using your tax dollars. It is a deal worked out between the Justice Department and the IRS to settle Trump's lawsuits over leaks and claims of unfair treatment. A so-called anti-weaponization fund has been set up to dole out the money to pay Trump's allies who claim they were unfairly targeted by previous administrations. The amount? $1.776 billion. A symbolic nod, of course, to the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. By the way, it is possible the money that's in that fund could be tapped by January 6 rioters.
This is reimbursing people that were horribly treated. It's anti-weaponization. They've been weaponized. They've been, in some cases, imprisoned wrongly. They paid legal fees that they didn't have. They've gone bankrupt. Their lives have been destroyed. And they turn out to be right.
Now, the DOJ says anyone with a claim can file for an apology and a monetary settlement. The settlement says there are no partisan requirements. A group of 5 people will gatekeep the money, and the Attorney General will pick them. In this case, that's Todd Blanche, Trump's former personal lawyer. But the president will have the ultimate power to fire any of the gatekeepers. The DOJ claims Trump himself will not receive any payments, but he will get a formal apology. We've got a lot of folks at the table, and this is going to be hot sauce, I can tell already, with the size and the arm crossing. So we're going to start with you, Ms. Anna Navarro. Is this a slush fund to appease his buddies, or is there something that is legitimate going on here?
And the other part you forgot to mention is that there's going to be no transparency, according to them. That they're not going, right, that they're not going to know. We, the taxpayer who are paying for this, are not going to know who this is going to. This is so bad. It is so bad. It's so bad prima facie. It's just bad on its face. But then when you put it in context, in the fact that Americans can't afford gas, Americans can't afford groceries, farmers are going bankrupt all over this country. We are in the middle of a war that's now cost $50 billion. He wants $1.5 billion for a ballroom. He wants hundreds of millions of dollars for an arch. He wants $15 million to paint the reflecting pool. And then you put on top of that now a $1.7 billion slush fund to pay his supporters and the people who feel victimized. I mean, I'm so old. I remember when most Republicans used to balk and be shocked and outraged by the idea of reparations to people who suffered slavery. But we're going to be giving money to January 6th insurrectionists. That part's okay. Yeah, it's disgusting.
Scott, is this reparations?
Look, I think there's a lot about it we don't know. I don't know who's on the committee. I don't know exactly who's going to be applying for it.
The people that Trump approves.
Well, they say anybody can apply for it, and I don't think.
Okay, I'll apply for it. You think I'll get it?
Have you ever been unfairly targeted by the Department of Justice?
I have been unfairly targeted by this administration. Yeah.
Have you been unfairly prosecuted by the Department of Justice?
Are those the people that are going to be in this?
So the answer is no, you haven't. So the question is, has anyone in the history of the United States ever been unfairly targeted by the Department of Justice? Of course they have, and there ought to be, just at a top line, a way for people to seek recourse if they have been unfairly targeted. That having been said, this all started by the fact that Donald Trump had his tax returns unfairly and illegally leaked by the IRS. That's where all this started, and he was initially seeking damages for that, which he has given up. He'll receive no money, as I understand it, and now it has morphed into this idea that there have been people that have been unfairly targeted. All of this makes me a little uncomfortable because it's a lot of money and it didn't go through the U.S. Congress. That's number one. Number two, I don't want to see a president necessarily handpicking people to get payments where he could be accused of just picking people out who are political allies. But do I want a world where if you've been unfairly targeted by the federal government and it was truly unfair and you truly had something done to you that should not have been done, do I think people should be able to seek recourse for that? Absolutely, I do, because I think it probably happens, and not on a partisan basis, but it probably happens all the time. And I think people ought to be able to seek some sort of damages if they've been unfairly targeted by the department or by the federal government.
James Comey or Tish
Right.
James?
I mean, I guess the question is, you've got this. The overarching thing that has people really riled is the January 6 rioters, some of whom pled guilty. I was in one of the trials for the Proud Boys and for the Oath Keepers, and I watched the whole thing, and I watched it play out, and it played out as any justice, any trial would play out. And here they're pardoned, and they could seek money, should they be able to.
My personal view is anybody who committed documented violence against the government or against police officers, they've not been unfairly treated. If they ended up being convicted of a crime because of violence they committed, I got no real sympathy for them. Now, if there were people who were on the periphery that were swept up, over prosecuted, whatever, and they have a way to seek a recourse here, I have less of a problem with that. But I draw the line at violence. If you've committed political violence, if you attack the government building, if you attack police officers, I got real no sympathy.
Scott, you don't have a problem with Todd Blanche handpicking 5 people who Trump can fire at any moment and giving reparations that are then not disclosed to the American people who are paying for this slush fund?
Why do you know it's not going to be disclosed?
Because because it says so.
Is it to be public in whole or in part?
I mean, kind of like, like I have an issue with the...
So wait, it is going to be public?
Public in whole or in part.
So there are parts that
they could redact, is what you say, not disclose.
You mean like
it's not private from the judge.
I think that's a great example.
Hey, everybody. I have some news, and it's not good. The Justice Department's settlement with Donald Trump is even worse than we knew. It turns out there was a secret part of the agreement that was hidden from us when it was announced yesterday. I just reviewed it, and I am struggling to find words to tell you how catastrophic and corrupt it is. I'm Liz Oyer, the former pardon attorney for the Department of Justice. Here's the deal. Todd Blanche, in his official capacity as acting attorney general, signed this one-page document right here. It's called a release of claims. And here's what it does. It signs away all claims against Donald Trump on behalf of the United States. In other words, it says that Trump cannot be investigated, audited, or sued by the United States government in the future. That includes any government agency, the Justice Department, the IRS, etc. In effect, this will end the ongoing audits of Trump and his companies. But that's not all. It forfeits our right to collect any taxes owed by Trump and his businesses. It waives our right to try to reclaim the money he stole from taxpayers. It gives up our right to sue him for damages or to pursue really any legal recourse whatsoever against Donald Trump. And it binds the United States forever, meaning it applies even after Trump and Blanche leave office. And it's actually even worse than that because it's not limited to just Donald Trump. It also signs away all of our claims against his companies, his family members, and his associates. This is a staggering betrayal of the public trust. Even compared to other bad acts by this administration, this one stands out as especially unforgivably corrupt. Trump and Blanche are colluding together to give away our money, our rights, and our democracy. I'm sure there will be lawsuits that will argue that this agreement is illegal and unenforceable, and hopefully they will succeed. I'm not sure who will bring them or when, but I'll be keeping a close eye on it, and I'll keep you informed. In the meantime, please help me sound the alarm. This is truly an emergency situation. Please share this with your friends and neighbors and make sure they understand how corrupt and unconscionable this is. Call your elected reps and demand that they take action, whatever you can think of to help defend our democracy. Thanks.
What made this CNN segment so revealing is that even Scott Jennings, somebody whose entire role on these panels is usually to clean up MAGA talking points and defend Donald Trump no matter what, could barely hold the line here. You could actually hear the hesitation in his voice, because deep down, everybody understands how insane this situation looks. And that's really the bigger issue now with the Trump administration. We are way past normal partisan politics at this point. We are not talking about disagreements over tax policy or border policy or spending priorities anymore. We are talking about whether the United States government is being transformed into a protection racket for Donald Trump and his political allies. Because let's really break this down carefully. The federal government is potentially creating a massive, taxpayer-funded compensation system overseen by Trump loyalists, where people connected to January 6th and other Trump-aligned grievances could receive money, apologies, and settlements from the federal government itself. Think about how extraordinary that is. This wasn't a natural disaster relief package. This wasn't compensation for innocent people exonerated after decades in prison. This wasn't aid for struggling Americans. This was specifically framed around anti-weaponization, meaning the administration itself gets to decide who counts as a victim of government persecution. And who's overseeing it? Trump's own people. That's why Ana Navarro was absolutely right to call it a slush fund. Because once you create a structure like this with limited transparency and heavy executive control, it stops looking like justice and starts looking like political patronage. And Scott Jennings knew that too. That's why he kept retreating into vague hypotheticals about people being unfairly prosecuted in general, rather than directly defending the structure Trump is putting together. He wanted to turn the discussion into a philosophical debate about government overreach, because the actual details of this proposal are politically radioactive. Because here's the reality. If Republicans truly cared about compensating victims of government abuse, there are countless groups they have historically ignored, mocked, or outright opposed helping. Where was this energy for people wrongfully convicted and later exonerated? Where was this energy for Black Americans disproportionately targeted during the war on drugs? Where was this energy for families destroyed by discriminatory policing? Where was this energy for victims of unconstitutional surveillance programs? Where was this energy for people whose civil rights were violated by the state? That's why the reparations comparison hit Republicans so hard during this panel discussion. Ana Navarro exposed the contradiction perfectly. Conservatives spent decades insisting reparations were morally wrong, economically impossible, or unfair to taxpayers. But now suddenly, when Trump supporters are involved, billions of dollars somehow become available. And that tells you this was never about principle. It was always about who conservatives believed deserved sympathy. That's the core hypocrisy here. And honestly, the most disturbing part may not even be the money itself. It's the broader normalization of executive power abuse happening right in front of everyone's eyes. Because the more details that emerge about this agreement, the worse it looks. The idea that provisions could exist protecting Trump, his family, businesses, or associates from future government actions should alarm every single American, regardless of political affiliation. Because once a president begins using the machinery of government to shield himself and his allies from accountability, you are entering territory that democracies are not supposed to enter. That's the kind of thing Americans used to criticize in authoritarian governments overseas. Now people are debating whether it's happening inside the United States itself.
And what's remarkable is how numb parts of the political system have become to behavior that would have once caused total bipartisan outrage. Imagine for a second if a Democratic president attempted something remotely similar. Imagine Barack Obama or Joe Biden setting up a massive taxpayer-backed compensation fund overseen by personal allies while simultaneously signing agreements limiting future government action against themselves, their families, and political associates. Republicans would call it tyranny. Fox News would run nonstop coverage for months. Congress would hold emergency hearings. There would be impeachment demands immediately. But because it's Trump, so much of the Republican Party simply adjusts itself to whatever the new standard becomes. That's why Scott Jennings' role on these panels is so important politically. He represents the modern Republican media strategy almost perfectly. He rarely fully endorses the most extreme aspects directly. Instead, he reframes them, softens them, and normalizes them just enough to make them sound debatable. Notice how he kept saying things like, well, if someone was unfairly targeted, well, there should probably be recourse. Well, I'm uncomfortable with some parts. That's the strategy. Take something outrageous and slowly move the conversation away from whether it should exist at all and toward technical discussions about implementation details. But the implementation details are not the main problem. The main problem is the underlying concept itself. The federal government should not be transformed into a political grievance payment system controlled by the president's allies, especially not after January 6th. And that part is crucial, because many of the people potentially connected to this were not innocent bystanders. These were individuals connected to an effort to overturn a democratic election. Some assaulted police officers, some smashed through barricades, some openly admitted they wanted to stop the certification of the election results.
These people were prosecuted through the normal court system. They had trials, they had attorneys, they had appeals. Many pleaded guilty. And now the same movement that spent years screaming about law and order suddenly wants Americans to view these individuals as persecuted political martyrs, deserving compensation from taxpayers. That contradiction is impossible to ignore, especially after conservatives spent years attacking racial justice protesters, student protesters, immigrants, and basically anyone else who challenged authority in ways they disliked. Now suddenly political violence becomes complicated when the perpetrators support Trump? And that's the deeper danger of Trumpism in general. Moral standards become completely conditional. The rules apply differently depending on political loyalty. If you are against Trump, institutions must punish you aggressively. If you are loyal to Trump, institutions should protect you. That double standard corrodes public trust faster than almost anything else in a democracy, because eventually ordinary people stop believing justice is neutral. They stop believing accountability is real. They stop believing the system treats citizens equally. And once that trust collapses, political instability grows very quickly. That's why this story matters beyond just CNN panels or online political arguments. This is about whether the United States is moving toward a system where political power itself becomes legal protection, where loyalty to the president determines who receives government sympathy, government resources, and government protection. And if Americans normalize that, then the long-term damage to democratic institutions could be enormous, because democracies do not usually collapse all at once. They erode gradually. When corruption becomes tolerated, when accountability becomes selective, and when political movements convince themselves that protecting their leader matters more than protecting the integrity of the system itself.